and we will go ahead and get started. And here we go. All right. What we've got for tonight, oh, pull that back up. Here we go, is our topic is my food safe, safety of the US food supply. And this is I think it's a really relevant topic because people seem to be very confused. I think, of course, like we're all confused when you go to the grocery store and there's so many different items and there's all these different sort of marketing claims. And of course, food companies are really trying to get your dollar because they want that profit. And so they'll do kind of whatever it takes to get your attention to their item and to get you to spend your money on their item. And so what I find is that all of that marketing can make it very confusing for just the typical consumer to figure out, like, does this even matter? Do I need to pay more for an item that is free of this or doesn't have that or includes this in it? So what we want to cover today is kind of several different hot topics around what's in your food, answer questions if that's safe for you to consume or not. And then I'll do the same as I did with my last webinar, where we had a blog post every week that kind of covered one of the topics that we'll talk about. So you're going to get all, of course, the quick bottom line answers tonight during the webinar. But if you want more information, be sure you read the articles that I have sending out. So this is just about me. For those of you who don't know me, I know some of you on are quite familiar with me, so I'm sorry, you know, you've heard this a million times, but I am the wellness director for Cancer Services. We're a nonprofit in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. That nonprofit is what makes these programs possible and available to you at no charge. So if you're ever wondering where you want to donate money to a good cause, you can always think of Cancer Services and the Cancer Dietitian. So I am a registered dietitian, a licensed nutritionist, and a board certified specialist in oncology nutrition, which was, as I just briefly explained about my alphabet soup of letters behind my name, that's basically what that is. And I've been working in oncology for 16 years now. And I have been on staff at Cancer Services for 14 years. So I developed cancerdietitian.com in 2007 and lots of articles that are on there. Now, actually, I think I have over 7,000 or 8,000 subscribers to the e-newsletter, lots of social media followers, and also a podcast that is hit or miss in terms of how many episodes I've released recently, but there's a lot of good stuff on there, I think, that hits most people's common questions. I do have a BS in biology from NC State and a master's degree in public health from UNC Chapel Hill. And my passion really is around wellness for cancer prevention and specifically survivorship. I specialize in making healthy living fun and practical and lowering your anxiety around food. And away from work, I travel with my personal circus, my husband, my 11-year-old daughter, 4-year-old son, and I do added a lively beagle to our lives. So now dog training is back on my list of things that I do. But today, these are the topics we're going to cover. We're going to talk about, and if you followed my blog, I actually already wrote about microplastics and seafood, and I've written a little bit about food additives and preservatives. We're going to touch on hormones in food. We're going to talk about antibiotics in animal products. We're going to talk about genetically engineered foods, heavy metals in fish, and artificial sweeteners. So kind of trying to hit some of the top things to know about what's in your food that you pick up at the grocery store. So we'll go through these one by one. I'll give you some information and feel free to throw questions in the chat for those of you who are on live. Put things in the Q&A as I'm talking. If things come up or questions, I'm happy to take those. And I expect that we should be done around 9 o'clock, but I'm happy to hang on a little longer if there's a lot of questions. All right, so microplastics and seafood. I'm not sure how much of a big issue this is. They're actually outlawed as of, I can't remember what year it became outlawed, but there's been a lot in the past. It's generally found in like skincare products, like little tiny beads, basically, that can get through filtration systems and end up in the ocean. Now, the bottom line is that the effects of microplastics in humans is still being studied. So we don't have real clear evidence. But what we do know is that it's probably not a big deal for most people because they're found mainly in the digestive system of marine animals. So for larger fish and seafood, we don't actually eat the digestive system, just the meat around it. So it's kind of a non-issue in the larger fish. Mainly poses a problem in smaller fish and seafood such as sardines, anchovies, and shrimp in case, you eat the whole thing. It does not mean that you need to cut out smaller seafood just because there's a chance that there's microplastics in there. I think most people don't eat enough of those small seafood to really make a difference in their diet. But they are small plastic debris that comes mostly from hygiene products, as I mentioned. Microbeads is kind of the term that was used for a while. And then sometimes large pieces of plastic that maybe have been broken down into smaller pieces and are just, in the ocean, and then seafood eat them, of course, as they're going around. So the effects, as I mentioned, are still being studied on humans, but the current evidence is that we think that it's pretty minor. So to me, this is not something that I would worry about. I do enjoy sardines. I do enjoy seafood. I don't eat sardines like every single day. So this is not, I don't think, an issue for me. If you are somebody who eats small seafood on a daily basis or like 3-4 times a week, then maybe you might think about, is this something? But if you do not eat small seafood that often, or mostly you eat larger seafood where this is a non-issue, I don't think you even need to worry about this. So there's a lot of benefits of seafood. And so, when you weigh the risks versus the benefits of the seafood, it certainly is a large benefit for you to include seafood in your diet. So this would not be a reason for me to think that I wouldn't have seafood in my diet. And we are pretty sure that when we indirectly consume any microplastics, it's just passed through our system, it's not causing problems. And there's so many benefits of seafood. So omega-3 fatty acids, vitamin D, vitamin B12, phosphorus, zinc, iron, lots of reasons that we encourage seafood intake. And the other thing I'll say about this is we'll talk a little bit more about seafood when we talk about heavy metals in seafood. So I think those pair together. If I thought about it, maybe we would have put those back to back, but we didn't. So our next topic is additives and preservatives, which quite honestly, we could probably do an entire hour on this. What are food additives and preservatives? There's quite a few different ones. And it's any substance that is added to food during food production. It's regulated by the FDA, and they are added for good reason. It's to keep our food safe. It is so that food does not spoil on the shelf. It really does help to make sure that we have a robust food supply so that, when we go to the grocery store, the shelves are stocked with foods that we can eat. We don't have to grow that food. We don't have to process or produce that food for ourselves. We go to the store and we buy it, and it's not going bad. And that's because of some of the additives. So they increase safety and freshness of your food. The additives can help increase nutritional value or improve the taste or texture of the food. If they, sometimes they use additives to replace things that they take away so that the texture is the same. So if you think about some of the low-fat food items, taking the fat out of the food changes the texture and the taste. And so they might use additives to replace it. There's direct additives, which are added for a specific purpose, and indirect additives, which are just kind of happen to be introduced to the food through either packaging or handling or things like that. So mostly what we're talking about here are the direct additives, which would be on the ingredient list. And before marketing any foods with additives or preservatives, before they can even hit the shelf in your grocery store or be available to you, the FDA must approve to make sure it's safe. So any food additives that are in the foods you eat have been approved by the FDA. And if additives are approved, the FDA releases regulations on usage and label identification. So I think it's just really good to know there are regulations on the food additives. Now, if you've attended my other webinars, sometimes I talk about supplements and the fact that nutritional herbs and supplements do not have any or very little regulation whatsoever in the US. So this is different. So supplements are kind of their own thing, but when it comes to food, food is highly regulated. So even imported food, so if they're products that are coming from other countries, they have to meet our same standards by the FDA. So no one can like add things in another country and then just ship it here to go on the shelves. They have to meet our guidelines, our government guidelines. So I do feel good about that process. Now, of course, there's plenty of additives that are approved by the FDA, which means that they're perfectly safe for us to consume. But the question is, are they actually, nutritious? Is that food item actually going to be nutritious? So I found it interesting when my intern and I were doing research around this, that the International Food Council or something like that, someone had done a survey of Americans to find out about sort of what they were concerned about. And they found that more than 50% of people were more concerned about sort of chemical sounding names in their food than they were concerned about actually consuming food that has nutritional value. And I think that's just a little backwards, because if you've attended some of my other webinars, I talk about how my approach to nutrition is to think about how the foods you eat can nourish your bodies. The choices that you make on food to put on your plate should primarily be there for nourishing your body. So when I go to the grocery store, I'm not looking to avoid things because they have chemical sounding names or avoid things because I think they're, quote, bad for me. I'm going to the grocery store to find the items that I think are actually going to nourish me, my body, my soul. There's of course a lot of maybe not so healthy foods that are very nourishing to my soul, and those are appropriate to have in your cart as well. But to me, my first concern is going to be, how is this going to nourish me and my family, as opposed to what items in this food do I have to avoid? So I think that in itself is a little bit of where Americans can tend to get misguided, is that they're not actually looking for nutritious food. They're just trying to avoid certain things. So when it comes to these additives and preservatives, there are a lot of different things. Okay, so we've talked about, they've all been approved by the FDA. So I think we can have a certain level of comfort or confidence in knowing that foods that are on the shelf have any additives, they have been approved. Now, how comfortable are you with the process that it was approved or that particular item? Just kind of depends on you, and also how often do you eat that item. So if it's a infrequent, like it's not very often, then to me it doesn't even matter, because it doesn't have a significant impact on the foods that you're eating on a regular basis. But if it's something that you buy regularly, like every time you go to the grocery store, you pick it up, you have it multiple times a week, then I would definitely pay attention to what's in there. Let me see what this next slide is. So there are some food additives and preservatives that we know we want to be sort of cautious with, especially when it comes to cancer. So preservatives used in processed meats, we know, do increase risk for colorectal cancer. Now, I've talked about this before, but it really comes down to how much of that are you eating. Processed meats, so this is, I think, yeah, for our next slide. Processed meats include sausage, bacon, ham, salami. And so for people who tend to eat this regularly, I would be looking at ingredient lists and trying to figure out which ones you want to kind of stay away from or which ones you might want to have less of. So sodium nitrates are the ones that really are the reason that we say to limit your consumption of processed meats. You don't have to completely cut them out, but these are not things that I would include regularly, or as I define it, a habit is doing something 3 times a week or more. So if I buy something like deli meats, I find the deli meats that don't have preservatives or don't have the nitrates in them. It is difficult. Now, sodium itself is technically, it's kind of under this category as generally recognized as safe. So there are high sodium foods, right, They're approved by the FDA. They are safe to consume, but you would not want to consume a lot of high sodium foods regularly because we know that's not good for our health. So however, we know with the sodium nitrates and the processed meats that there is this increase in risk. And so we don't really have a threshold of what we think is, oh, it's okay to eat some, but not more. And so what I tell people is if you don't eat them, you don't need to start eating them. But if they are a part of your diet that you really love, and it seems like everybody's in love with bacon right now, finding ways to include those in moderation, I think are fine. If that's something that kind of brings joy to your plate. But otherwise, you don't have to include them, and we wouldn't recommend starting. Trans fats are types of fats that are used in products to help keep them shelf stable. Most people, I think, are aware that those have been cut back on quite a bit over the last 10 years or so. Monosodium glutamate, or MSG, is commonly used in some foods. It does have a high sodium content, but I actually had another dietitian who was commenting to me that sometimes because of the umami sort of flavor that MSG has, that you can use, it tends to actually bring a lot of flavor in less amount of sodium. So it may depend on the product, whether it's higher in sodium or not. So to me, seeing MSG on a label doesn't necessarily mean you should completely avoid it, but I would still pay attention to maybe how much sodium is in there and kind of use that as a guide. And then some people are sensitive to sulfites. So that is something, if you're sensitive to that, you want to pay attention to. Now, I will say there are lots and lots and lots of other food additives that I'm not going to walk through one at a time. If you're somebody who doesn't really care, about reading ingredient lists or worrying about things, I would tell you, I don't think that you need to read all the ingredient lists. I do read ingredient lists for things that I buy regularly, but I read it for the purpose of finding out how nutritious this item is and if it has the things that I think it should have in it based on what the item is. If you're somebody who's looking for information on a specific food additive, I do think that the Center for Science and the Public Interest has a good guide. I would say they probably err on the more cautious side of avoiding food additives that there isn't a lot of research to support saying it's safe. So they would say to avoid several different food additives that you might find in some regular items. But what I tell people is that you could check out their guide. You can see what they say about different types of food additives, or you can just kind of be like, you know what, I'm going to eat lots of fruits and vegetables and not worry about some of the processed foods that I might include. So I'm going to put in the chat. Their website is chemicalcuisine.org. It didn't hyperlink for some reason, but you could put that in your browser. And you can go to their food additives section and you can see which ones they sort of rank as safe food additives, the ones they rank as yellow or use with caution, and then the ones that they think are red, and a lot of them, when we were reading over it, a lot of them are just that the Center for Science and the Public Interest feels like, well, there's not enough research to really know if this is harmful or not. So you could think it's not harmful, but they also make a point of there's other ways that food companies could use, other preservatives basically, or additives that could be used for that same purpose that would then, that are better researched. So someone's asking about luncheon meat, about Applegate organic turkey breast. So I am not somebody that thinks you have to eat organic. I'm fine with organic or not organic. I don't, either way is fine. So that piece of it, what I would ask, because I'm not familiar with all the brands, when I go and get turkey meat or chicken or sliced meat, I go to the deli section and I just ask for the ones that don't have preservatives and are not too high in sodium. So I would tell you to just look at that food label, see if there's any sodium nitrates in the ingredient list, and kind of just check out what the ingredient list looks like. If it has those additives in it, which, and and if it's organic, there's certain rules around organic that will automatically. So I'm not sure what the rules are around, food additives. I will say that organic has rules around how they grow foods. So organic meat, the animal has to be fed only like organic feed. I honestly don't think that really makes that big of a difference. If some people think it changes the taste. I think by the time you get a deli meat sliced turkey, it's not going to taste that different. But they often will sort of approve, quote, organic pesticides that many of them are not any safer than synthetic pesticides. And so I don't know about food additives. That's a good question around in terms of organic, like, are there different lists of what's approved? So that's all to say, when you buy deli meats or other processed meats, just look at the ingredient list and see if nitrates are on the list. And we even did some research. There's some natural nitrates, but the way they work in the body is very similar. So like celery, I think it was celery, a lot of times they'll use that, but it doesn't necessarily make it a healthier nitrate. So that said, you'll have to report back to me after you look at your ingredient list. Let's see if there's anything else on that. That's basically it on that, but we could spend a lot of time. When you look over the chemical cuisine, you can kind of see they give you more information about each additive, what it's used for, what kind of research is behind it, and whether that group thinks that it's enough research or not. But I will tell you that my kind of bottom line is that I don't worry as much about food additives. I am more concerned about sort of the overall quality of what the foods are you're choosing. All right, so hormones in our food is another big question that people can be concerned about. So when it comes to animals, the amount of hormones found in our food and that are used in animal products are a safe amount. They're regulated by the FDA. They are used for production purposes, of course. They're mainly used in cattle and sheep to help gain weight, to increase milk production. And cows naturally produce a hormone called BST. And so that's always found in their milk. I mean, it's just like us humans, we produce our own hormones within our bodies. So animals all produce their own hormones. So when you consume animals, you will be consuming their hormones. And then it's a matter of whether you're concerned about, how any hormones that are used to sort of beef up, for lack of a better term, beef up the cow, or, and quite honestly, it's not any different from us humans taking birth control. It's just another form of hormone that the cow or the, animal already has. So those are not things that concern me. For a while, people were buying, trying to look out for milk that didn't have the recombinant BST, which is just, again, like a birth control kind of version of the natural hormone that cows have. But that doesn't bother me. When we consume hormones, whether they're natural or synthetic, like from an animal, so if there's hormones in animal milk, our body just breaks them down. They are not biologically active in our body. So there's no evidence showing that if you consume cow milk with a cow that was treated with hormones, that you will have any higher level of hormones in your body, or that, there's some myths around, oh, this is why girls have puberty early is the extra hormones in the food. That is not true. So there, and then I will also say that, so that's the case in terms of milk and cattle, but then there's also this sort of rumor around, oh, well, plant foods, other foods can have hormones too. So I will remind you that plants don't grow human estrogen. Cows don't grow human estrogen. Cows grow cow estrogen. Plants don't grow human estrogen. Plants grow plant hormones. So the soy and cancer issue is really about plant estrogens or phytoestrogens that are in soy foods, which some people have theorized that it can promote hormone positive cancer growth. but research shows that is not true. That risk of breast cancer is related to hormones produced by our own bodies rather than any hormones consumed in food. Those hormones are not biologically active again in the human body. The level that is found in soy foods or other plant products is going to be very, very, very small compared to our own body's production of hormones. So this is not an issue. I don't tell people they need to avoid it. Now with the hormone or the soy foods, I do suggest that you eat the food version as opposed to any kind of version that's powdered or processed kind of version of soy. And I do have a handout. I think you can see this. You can get this handout off of my website that talks about soy and breast cancer. It's also applicable to other types of hormone positive cancer. It kind of gives you a list of like, these are the soy foods we recommend, and these are the ones that we would say to limit. So that I will put in the chat is at cancerdietitian.com/soy. Okay, so we've got our report on the Applegate turkey breast, and Applegate is not sponsoring this webinar, so maybe they should. So our ingredient list, this is fun. This is a good good way to virtually engage people. Okay, turkey breast, water, sea salt, potato starch, chicken broth, rosemary extract. Sounds good. Sounds like the expiration date on that thing is probably sooner rather than later, which is also another sign, right? If you're a deli meat can hang in a package for 8 months, maybe it's not so healthy. All right, different question. How safe is sodium phosphate? I think it's not one of the preservatives that's on a list to avoid as much as the nitrates. I will say it's going to increase the amount of sodium that's in your food. So I would probably pay attention to the nutrition facts label on that one. And then estrogen-like chemicals in plastics. Also not really an issue. What is it? It's called like some people will say, well, that's like an endocrine regulator or something like that. What I would tell you is that it's really not. So packaging also has to be approved for the food supply. So if something says, I do tell people don't use plastic that's not designed for the use you're using it for. So if you get a microwave safe plastic bag, some of those steamable type vegetables that you microwave in plastic, which I'll admit, it feels weird to microwave in plastic because if you grew up like I did, it was like, don't put plastic in the microwave, it's gonna melt to your food. But engineers who create these things and food scientists, they test them. If it is designed for microwave safe use, I'm okay with it. But I would say I've also, I worked with a group and we microwaved those potatoes. They were sweet potatoes in the special plastic you buy at the store. And it was amazing. And I couldn't believe it, but it didn't like stick to the food. You can use some plastic wraps you can use in the microwave, but it's not supposed to touch the food. So what I would tell you is you need to follow the directions and to really pay attention to what it's used for. So question about BPA, which I have written about, it's been a long time, but same thing. There's really no evidence that there is problems that are caused by BPA. The reason that so many companies started removing BPA from their products is simply because consumers were afraid of it and they wanted to be able to sell their product. And so they decided, well, we'll just make it BPA free. And then we can put on the label BPA free and then people will buy it. So it doesn't concern me. But I would not use, if it's a water bottle that says, do not use in the microwave, I would not put my food in it and microwave it. If it's a water bottle that says, don't use it in the dishwasher or top rack only, those are, I use them for the purposes that they're designed. So I don't use single-use water bottles more than once. Part of that is because they're not designed to resist bacteria. So a lot of bacteria can get stuck on the top of those. But BPA is not they took out BPA in the plastics, then they're going to just use something else. So I think that's what, if you're concerned about plastic, you can get glass. The environmental issue is a different topic, and that's not my expertise, so I'm not advising on that. But in terms of your health, like BPA-free water bottles or water bottles with BPA, neither one bothers me, and there's not strong evidence showing that it causes problems. Good questions. Let's see if there's anything else about that. I don't think so. Okay. Let me see what else. These are good. Good questions. Okay. Can you freeze a water bottle for future use to kill the bacteria? It's going to depend on the bacteria, and I didn't do that kind of research for this webinar. Some bacteria is freezer resistant, which is why some freezer foods can still cause foodborne illness. What I would tell you about freezing, so people will put, those things like Aquafina or whatever brand water bottles, stick them in the freezer so you have this cold water to drink. If it's not freezer safe, I don't really like that. If you're only using it to like ice your foot, I don't really care. But if you're going to drink, the water or whatever, I would just verify that the container is supposed to be freezer safe. Just, sometimes like freezer safe plastic bags, they're just not thick enough to keep freezer burn from getting on your food. So they're just designed for different uses. I don't think it's a big deal if you use a water bottle from the freezer. But I would say I usually follow the guidelines of what the plastic says on it, like dishwasher safe or not, freezer safe or not, that kind of thing. Good questions. Okay, thoughts on using soy sauce. So soy sauce really doesn't count as a soy food. But there's not really any soy estrogens in it at all. There's no fiber in it. None of the benefits that you get from soy are actually in soy sauce. Soy sauce is really just a lot of sodium, kind of a flavorful way to add salt to your food. It's fine to use. I tend to buy the low sodium soy sauce just to help sort of control the amount of salt or sodium that's in my diet. But I think it's great for flavor. A lot of dishes, I cook tofu actually, and then I use soy sauce to flavor. Okay, so antibiotics in animal products, also a hot topic. They are necessary to control the spread of disease, and they are also regulated by the FDA. So bacteria and pathogens obviously grow in environments that animals live in. And that's why antibiotics are required to keep diseases and infections at a minimum. You can see these cows, they're all grazing together. Diseases spread, from one animal to the next. We're all aware of that right now. And sometimes if it's bacterial overgrowth, the animals need to be treated with antibiotics. I don't see anything wrong with that. I think that's a nice thing to do for the animals. Antibiotics used in animal products are regulated by the FDA. So they're only approved for use when an animal is sick or when there's a sickness among a group of animals that needs to be controlled, or as a preventive measure when an animal group is at high risk for catching disease. So I think it's important to remember that. I will tell you from the standpoint of organic milk, they're not allowed to use antibiotics. So if their cow is sick and needs an antibiotic, it's kicked out of the herd, and they can never ever use that cow's milk in the organic milk supply. However, even in conventionally grown milk or conventionally produced milk where they might use antibiotics, if the cow is actively on antibiotics, their milk cannot be put into food production. So they dump all the milk while the cow is on the antibiotic, and then the cow has to test clear of antibiotics in their milk before the milk can be added back into the supply. And it's checked in multiple places. And dairy farmers, if you don't know, they don't make a lot of money. Like right now, they're still, I think, losing money. They have no incentive to let some antibiotic milk slip into the food supply because they get fined, all their milk gets dumped from that load, and they don't get paid for it. So there's no reason that somebody would sort of be lazy and contaminate their own milk with the antibiotics. So to me, that's not a big deal. I am not concerned about that. I buy regular milk, and sometimes I buy organic milk. It just depends on the day and the price and what I feel like. But to me, I have seen sick cows, and I would want them treated with antibiotics if they were sick. So that's, that's kind of the take home on that. Let's see, what is the risk? Antibiotic resistance would be kind of the big picture risk. It is not a risk to you as an individual. So as a dietitian, kind of my job is to help you figure out what's the best way to feed yourself and your family. So to me, I'm not worried about antibiotics in any animal products. Even like they'll label things. It's very frustrating at the store. They might label chicken antibiotic free, but it's never used anyway. Like there would not be there's no chicken at the store that you can buy that has antibiotics in it. So that label is really a little bit deceiving. It makes you think that there is antibiotic, chicken at the store, but there's not. So if you're paying more because something is labeled antibiotic free, that's just a marketing ploy to get your money. And they do tend to mark up some of those items. So it's not necessary that you buy those. So the antibiotic resistance is really more of for you personally, it's more of a problem if you don't like complete your course of antibiotics. So that would be something if your body is antibiotic resistant. Or if you're exposed to bacteria through direct contact with animals, which most of us aren't ever going to have. But I will say, people keeping backyard chickens are kind of increasing their risk. I have a neighbor who has chickens, so sometimes my kid goes down and visits them, and I'm always like, wash your hands, don't touch anything, because they just say this scary stuff. And we, of course, want to wash our hands all the time. So that to me is not an issue. All right, someone asked a question. I missed it. Where did it go? Tamari sauce, which I think is just it's like a fancier, sort of more pure version of soy sauce. But maybe you can inform me a little bit more. But I would say the same thing. I just look at the sodium content when it's something. A lot of sauces, barbecue sauce, or they typically have added sugar and added sodium, and I just kind of pay attention to how much is in there and what my options are, and then also how much of it do you use and how often. But if you're just using small amounts to help flavor like your fruits and vegetables and your dishes, I think that's great. Anything that gets people to eat fruits and vegetables, I'm pretty happy about. All right. So heavy metals, let's see. Okay. Heavy metals and how do they get into fish? So heavy metals are considered high in density, and they can be toxic in low quantities. So even small amounts of them. So think about arsenic, lead, mercury, which is most of what we think about when it comes to fish. They are kind of, we don't want a lot of them. So they are increasingly found in fish due to environmental impacts or how fish is grown, agriculture sort of runoff and farming type stuff. But it really depends on the fish and how it's made and what type of fish it is. So just because you've heard that there's heavy metal in fish, that doesn't mean that you should cut it out completely. Fish and seafood, like I mentioned before, have a lot of essential nutrients that are really good for you. And even with the risk, even a higher risk of like mercury in fish, it's recommended that you eat 8 to 12 ounces, or sometimes we say 2 to 3 times a week, you're consuming fish. And so those are things that we actually think are good things for you to consume. They tend to be found in the liver, gills, or flesh of the fish. So Not that we really are as familiar with the parts of a fish. We just buy the, the piece of meat at the store. But what we know that, the fish swim around in the water, and it depends on the environment of the water and how much of that toxic element might be in there. So actually things like farmed fish, it's very highly controlled how much, what their environment is. So you're going to be less likely to get any kind of toxic metals from a farmed fish. It's mostly going to be coming from wild caught fish. And so the varieties of fish that are lower in mercury, so if you're concerned about that, would be salmon, cod, tilapia, herring, halibut. Those tend to be lower. And then the higher mercury fish, we just say don't eat as often. Now, again, with my clients, I don't find that they're eating fish so often that it's even something to worry about. So there is a list, and I wish I had the link. I'm sorry, I don't. I'll try to send it out in the follow-up email and in the follow-up blog posts. But there are places that you can find out which fish have the most mercury in them. But again, unless you're consuming more than 12 ounces a week, I don't think it's something to be too concerned about. And you switch up what type of fish, you really don't have to worry about it. All right, bioengineered food, genetically engineered, genetically modified, all those kind of terms basically mean the same thing. They are essentially parts of a plant or an animal where the genetic code has been tweaked or altered for some kind of reason. So they might have inserted a gene into the DNA of a cell. So I don't know if you've heard about the rice, where they have basically inserted a gene so that it's higher in vitamin A. It can help prevent some malnutrition in certain countries where they don't have a lot of options for food. So by having these, I think they're really cool ways to help fight nutrition problems in certain parts of the world. So there's lots of reasons why we use genetically engineered food. But I will say that there's a lot of talk about it and a lot of fear around it. However, there's evidence that, there's a lot of studies on it that actually show that there's no harm done by consuming genetically engineered food. So the National Academies of Sciences reviewed like over 900 studies, and they didn't see any reason, no cause for concern. They're perfectly safe for consumption. There's lots of reasons that you do it. So I mentioned you can like add extra things into foods, or you can make the plant resistant to insects or to certain bugs, or Roundup resistant or Roundup ready seeds, where you can keep weeds under control without killing the plant. And a lot of people feel like, oh, that's so horrible, but actually I think it's a great technology that was developed and can help result in fewer pesticides used. And when they use these types of plants, then you can control the weed growth, you can get better yield or production or more food per acre, which helps us feed people, makes your food cheaper. And it's, really technology that's not been shown any harm. So the places where we have concern would be if somebody might have an allergy and some kind of gene is like spliced into a plant that you normally wouldn't be allergic to, and now you are. However, we don't have evidence that that has happened to people. It's not very common, but it is something that's it's on the radar. These products or these plants have to be approved again, and there's only like 10 different plants that have been approved. So there's all this labeling, some of these labeling laws that have been passed around. Oh, you have to, say if something's been genetically engineered. So that's a rule. So you'll see, in different places, probably in certain places, that genetic engineering was used. Okay. Now there is also a GMO free label that food companies have to pay in order to have this on their product. And they'll put it on all kinds of products that there's not even a GMO option. So if that's kind of like the whole, oh, there's no antibiotics in this chicken. Well, there's never antibiotics in chicken. Okay, so now there's these labels. People are, you put, no non-GMO bread, wheat bread. And it's like, well, there's no GMO wheat. So of course that's non-GMO wheat bread, but the food company paid to have that label, and therefore your food costs more because the label's on there. So what I would tell you is, first of all, I wouldn't pay attention to those labels because I think it's just confusing for people, and you would have to pay attention to, well, is there actually a genetically modified version of that product or not? If you are someone who's like, yeah, I just don't like that. I don't want to eat anything that's made with, genetic engineering. Organic, to be approved organic, you can't have genetically engineered plants. So you could buy organic and then that would cover it. So to me, that's not something that I'm concerned about. I do not change any of my buying behaviors based on those. And I was reading a report today that said most people don't. They passed that law about having to label genetic engineering, and they have not seen any change in people's buying behaviors. So I don't know. I think it's just added more confusion to the grocery store than it has helped. Okay, so I got, someone ran off and then came back with an ingredient list. So tamari is water, soybeans, bacterial culture, aspergillus something, lots of sodium. I would just tell you that's just a version of soy sauce. I mean, I'm sure it might have a little different flavor, but it's basically a version of soy sauce. So yeah, she said it's also pretty high in sodium, which soy sauce is. So bottom line, the benefits of genetically modified organisms or genetically modified plants or foods outweigh potential consequences by a big bunch. Regardless of genetic alterations, fruits, vegetables, and other plant foods are nourishing and can help decrease your risk of cancer. So to me, this is a non-issue. I know for some people it's a big issue, but when you look at the science, it really feels like, oh, this is kind of a cool thing that we're able to do to produce more food on the same amount of land and to help basically help people be better nourished. All right, anything else on that? The last thing, which I'm timing out quite nicely today, the last topic is artificial sweeteners. And this is one that gets a lot of attention, especially around cancer, and people tend to kind of be a little bit, I think, afraid of artificial sweeteners. So artificial sweeteners, you can see the picture here. There's like blue and there's pink and there's yellow. And Splenda's yellow. Truvia or stevia is usually a green packet. So what's it? You got sugar packets, you got artificial sweetener packets. Which ones should you pick? The difference is that artificial sweeteners have 0 calories, so they don't raise your blood sugar, and they tend to be more like sweeter by volume. So you wouldn't use the same like teaspoon of sugar. Okay, replace it with a teaspoon of artificial sweeteners. That would be way too sweet. So the most common artificial sweeteners that you can get in packets are Sweet and Low, Splenda, and Equal. So Equal's blue, Sweet and Low is pink, Splenda is yellow. Honestly, like since Splenda came out, I don't know if people really use a lot of the Equal and Sweet and Low, but stevia is also, it's not considered an artificial sweetener because stevia is technically a plant, like I grow the plant, and the leaves are sweet. It's amazing. So it's technically a natural sweetener. Now, by the time you take that plant and you dry it and you grind it up and you bleach it into white powder, it does feel a bit processed, but it is a natural sweetener. And then there are some other sweeteners that are used in food production that you don't buy in packets. So asulfame potassium is one that is often combined with Splenda in like diet sodas, that is on the ingredient list. And so each one sort of has its own process of how it was researched and then approved for the food supply. The bottom line is that all of these have been approved by the FDA and they've been deemed safe for consumption. So if there was significant data showing that they caused harm to us as humans, they would not be approved by the FDA. You know, whether you think that the FDA does a good enough job or not is a different story, but the point is that they have to have some proof that they're not harmful before they can be approved. Now, I will also point out, some people get, you know, they're like, well, I read the research study and it showed that it caused tumors in rats. And I'm like, we're not rats, you know? So really what we need to, and a lot of times these are studies that are done where like really high volumes of these artificial sweeteners are given to these animals to see if they develop tumors. If you go to the Chemical Cuisine website, they'll kind of tell you, you know, I think they've pretty much marked most of them as like caution or don't use them because you could use other things. So they are good with stevia. And so I think they basically, their conclusion is if you want a fake sugar, use stevia, or just use some sugar if you want something sweet. So, you know, my take home, I always tell people, it doesn't matter to me because I don't think that you should be using a lot of sugar or a lot of artificial sweeteners. So I think that for most people, the amount that they're going to be consuming is not going to be enough to cause any kind of harm. There is no evidence that it causes cancer in humans. And so it doesn't concern me. If people want to avoid artificial sweeteners, I think that's fine. I think you can have a perfectly healthy diet that does not have artificial sweeteners in it. You know, if you want to sweeten your coffee with a little bit of sugar, that's totally fine with me. That's what I tend to do. But I also enjoy a diet soda here and there. I grew up in the 90s and we did the diet sodas, and that's what my taste buds like. If you want to have a regular soda now and then, I also think that that's fine. It's really more about how often are you having it. So let's see, there's no clear data linking artificial sweeteners to cancer. It can be helpful, especially for people who have blood sugar management challenges. So if you have diabetes and you really just want to have sugar in your coffee and you don't want it to influence your blood sugars, I think the artificial sweeteners can have good use in that case. For most people, I tell you it'd be fine to just, you know, use sugar. So someone asked, is aspartame or other artificial sweeteners? I'm guessing that's related to a diet soda. And it really depends on the soda. Like I tend to prefer diet sodas that have aspartame because that's kind of the taste that I'm used to. Now the new one, like Coke, I think it's Coke Zero. They tend to use Splenda and asulfame potassium as their sweeteners because, you know, Splenda tastes like sugar. That's their logo or their slogan. So people who are used to sugar sodas prefer the taste of Coke Zero. Quite honestly, I think your taste buds, your body needs water. Your taste buds want something special. So whether you use Diet Coke, Coke Zero, regular Coke, to me, just having it in moderation is what's most important. Is it better to get drinks with real sugar? I wouldn't call either one better. I would call them different, and it depends on each person. So I think if you like regular sodas and you're having them, or sweet tea, and you just have them like once a week, that doesn't matter to me. I personally prefer the taste of a diet soda. So you know, at this point, we're choosing based on taste. It doesn't concern me, the artificial sweeteners. But I will say, I don't think it's healthy for someone to drink regular sodas all day long. And I don't think it's healthy for them to drink diet sodas all day long, because your taste buds get used to that really sweet taste, whether it's fake sugar or real sugar. And then it's hard. And then you've trained your taste buds to want really sweet taste. And it's hard to appreciate like the subtle and different flavors of fruits and vegetables and different types of foods. So we call that sweet acuity. So if you drink a lot of sugar sweetened beverages or a lot of artificially sweetened beverages, it basically trains your taste buds to really want that over sweet taste. And it's hard for you to like the other foods. All right. Someone's asking questions about fish. So take 2000 IU of vitamin D from fish oil. It is from cod, bunch of other ingredients. I don't have concern about that. I would tell you though, that when we talk about getting healthy fats from fish oils, what we're looking for is DHA and EPA. So let me put that in the chat. Fish oil. What you want to look at on the label is DHA plus EPA. Like, what is the total of DHA plus EPA in a quote dose? So your 2000 IUs of vitamin D, that's great. Like, that's pretty straightforward. But when you're looking at, are you getting those omega-3s, the healthy fish oils? We're looking for DHA and EPA. And the best ones will have 300, I think it's micrograms. I'm not totally sure what the unit is on that per serving. So I would look at that, but the ingredients don't bother me. Pink Himalayan salt. I would just, yeah, you can just see it tends to be less, I guess, less salty. Okay, I think I answered those that are on there. Okay, good questions. We should do a food label ingredient list kind of reading webinar where we do different categories of products. Anyway, okay, so I already talked about this. Pros of artificial sweeteners: helps with blood sugar control, doesn't damage your teeth, good way to consume sweets without excess amounts of sugar. Cons, sometimes people will get, overly concerned about sugar and then they tend to avoid nutritious foods that have some sugar in them. So we don't want you to get kind of too concerned. I don't have a problem with consuming some sugar in your diet. Artificial sweeteners, if you have a lot of them, they can have, or certain types, they can have a laxative effect that might not be so comfortable or desired, and they can cause bloating and gas for some people. So obviously, if that causes you problems, then don't consume them. So this is my bottom line, and I'm like wrapping us all up in an hour. This is great. First of all, our food supply is safe. The FDA and the USDA regulate and inspect our food. They don't allow them on the market if they contain unsafe chemicals, antibiotics, hormones, or toxic levels of metals. So, and the same thing when you may have heard me say before about organic versus conventional. The EPA regulates how much pesticides can be used in conventionally grown foods. So if there was a toxic amount that was ever used on a product, it would not be in the food supply. So I feel pretty confident in that. Balance is key. So it's okay to eat some processed foods. But if we do it on a regular basis or do it too often, that's when it becomes harmful to us. So even, the processed meats that we say, oh, stay away from those because of your risk for colon cancer. If you're having them in moderation and not too often, I'm not concerned about it. But if you're doing it regularly, that's when we start to think, yeah, I might change that habit and make it less often. Toxic foods are toxic in large amounts. So there is really nothing that I would tell you absolutely have to always avoid. And so I think that that's important to remember, that we can all kind of take a deep breath and feel confident with the foods we have, like the safest food supply on the planet. It's safer than it's ever been. I'm more concerned about foodborne illness than I am about any particular food additives that might be in the foods that we eat. And the benefits definitely outweigh the cost. So I encourage you to think about the nutritional value of the food and why it may be beneficial to you before thinking about, okay, what's in here that might be bad for me. So let's just take our applewood turkey as an example. What we're looking at is we want a food that is going to meet our protein needs and probably give us some vitamins and minerals. So I think that's a great thing. And so if you're going to eat it, like this participant commented that she eats it like every day for lunch or probably multiple days a week, it's important to read that ingredient list and make sure you feel confident in that. First of all, it's providing you with protein, that it is not overloading your sodium, and that it doesn't have additives in it that are making you concerned. And then you can go about your day. So, but primarily I want you to always remember that the purpose of nutrition and feeding yourself is to find nourishment that you're going to put in your body. The way that we choose foods should not be related to whether you can pronounce names of things in the label, because there's all kinds of chemicals. Just because they're chemical names doesn't mean that we have to be afraid of them. But really thinking about, the primary focus is foods are going to nourish me. And secondarily, then think about, okay, well, what else is in here that I might want to think about? Here's a good question. What about alcohol consumption? How much per day? So the recommendation, just like with processed meats, the recommendation for alcohol is to limit intake. Again, if you don't drink, we don't recommend that you start. If you do drink, we would say, following the guidelines like the Heart Association guidelines or the USDA's guidelines for moderation. So when it comes to cancer, we don't know of a safe level of alcohol to drink. Alcohol is a carcinogen. If you look at the guidelines around moderation, what is the definition of moderation for alcohol? 1 drink a day for women, 2 drinks a day for men. You don't get to save those up for the weekend. Once your day is gone, your day is gone. I personally think that if you do something every single day, it's a habit. I don't know that I would make it a habit to drink alcohol because it's not particularly nutritious for you. So I let people kind of figure out what works for them in the alcohol department. Sometimes it might be that the glass you drink it out of is more important than what's in the glass. I have had a client find that. I have recently found that like the days I drink wine while I'm making dinner, I'm completely, out of it for the rest of the night. I just want to go to sleep. So I've been drinking more kombucha actually. And guess what? I pour my kombucha into a wine glass and boy, that's fun. So I would tell you, it kind of just depends, but anywhere from not drinking anything at all to 1 drink a day for women, I think would be reasonable to decide on. Let's see. With estrogen positive breast cancer, should we be concerned about estrogen in milk? No, it doesn't concern me at all because it's not human estrogen that's in the milk, and your estrogen positive breast cancer is responding to human estrogen. That's why people take, tamoxifen or other aromatase inhibitor that blocks human estrogen. There's not human estrogen in cow's milk. It's not a concern for me. I don't think you have to drink only organic milk, even the conventionally grown milk. I'm not concerned. Organic cows still have hormones because they're cows. And cows are mammals and mammals produce hormones. So if you want organic milk, I think that's fine. And then almond milk. I'm not a fan of almond milk because I think milk should provide you with protein. Like from a nutritional standpoint, we are including milk in our diet because it gives us protein. Almond milk has almost 0 protein. So to me, it's like, it doesn't count in the milk category. Almond milk counts in the water or beverage category. And typically it has added sugars to make it taste good. So I prefer that people drink milk. If you want a plant-based milk, you can do soy milk, and that has the same amount of protein as cow's milk. So to me, that's the alternative that I would go with. Somebody else just says thanks. You're so nice. Thank you for being here. And if there's any more questions, I'm happy to stay on a little bit longer. But this has been really great. It's a lot, I know, and probably some of you are like, oh, I wanted more details. So I'll tell you that as we push these blog posts out over the next, I think it's going to go through the beginning of June. We're going to try to do it just like the last time. Send 1 a week with 1 topic per week. We'll have a little bit more detail in each week. We'll link you to other resources for you to read more if you want more. But hopefully this webinar kind of got you to the bottom line of our food supply is safe. I am not concerned about any particular ingredients that you absolutely always have to avoid. If you're concerned about them, you can read more from evidence-based resources and kind of make a decision for you. But I don't think that we need to be worried that there's some kind of toxin hiding in the foods that's going to cause problems to our health. Thanks so much. I'll hang on a little longer if any other questions come in, but I really appreciate you joining me tonight, and I hope to see you again next time, or hope you see me again next time. Thanks so much. Bye.